Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. We're in our semi-plenary. It's a bit of a new concept. There's an English expression that says you can't be half pregnant, but nonetheless you apparently can have a semi-plenary, something we've invented here. So we're going to have a 55-minute debate around the concept of European sovereignty. The title of this panel discussion is Towards European Sovereignty. So let's quash a rumour. Donald Trump isn't going to be here this afternoon. He was on the plan, but he decided against it at the last moment. So there's no one who's going to speak against this, I don't think. But we'll talk about European sovereignty and where we're at with this idea and which sectors it's moving forward in and which sectors are lagging behind. Is the European Union boosting or holding back European sovereignty, and what political direction do we need to look for in terms of moving towards greater European sovereignty? So, please leave me the fan, although the papers are floating everywhere, it's a good thing. Our tradition here in Aix-en-Provence is to give the floor to the economist who has prepared this panel. So that's going to be Emmanuelle AURIOL. So I'm going to start straight away by handing over to her. Emmanuelle, in your view, what does a sovereign mean? Is it just about not being invaded? Emmanuelle AURIOL, your microphone is on. First of all, I'd like to perhaps make a short introduction. We've got some incredible speakers this afternoon to talk about this really important issue. In some ways, one might think that there's a contradiction between sovereignty and European. Sovereignty is often a national concept, defending one's borders, but in the context that we are in, a single market, an integrated market, what we're talking about is a European collective capability to make our own decisions and to defend our collective interests in order to act in a very difficult environment, including in terms of our borders. We need a certain number of things to do that, and there's a number of obstacles to overcome. The first thing, first of all, is about production. Producing the things that we need to make without introducing critical dependencies. They need to build up stocks and inventories. We need a range of suppliers. We need to be able to recycle things. But it is a bit of a bottleneck for us as Europeans, particularly when we think of energy, because there's very little fossil fuel in Europe. The second thing is being able to control our technology, our data and our infrastructure. And once again, here, Europe is lagging very far behind, and I'm sure that we'll talk quite a bit about that over the next hour. And then it's also a question of protecting our citizens and our businesses, as well as our institutions. With the war in Ukraine, we see that defense and protection is a real issue for Europe. We are paying the price of the peace dividend that we cashed in earlier. We didn't invest in ongoing defense initiatives. So those are some of the key issues that face us. There are a number of bottlenecks, as I mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about them over the next little while with our speakers who are here. The first thing I would mention is our vulnerability to the lack of cheap energy. It's a real issue for our European industries because energy is more expensive for us than for other countries. So it's very easy to say that we should go towards decarbonized energy. That's a cheap option for us, but we're the only ones doing that around the world because in the world we're seeing a turn back to carbon-heavy fuels. Technology is another bottleneck. We are lagging behind in AI, space technology, and other forms of critical technologies because foreign businesses, the giants of cloud technologies, are very important. And we've seen these big companies, for example, in the war in Ukraine, here can make key decisions about access. We've also got a bottleneck in terms of skills and talent. So we've got a lack of skilled labour. In Europe, our population is ageing. We've got too few women who are interested in science. That's a real issue for the European area. Women generally get higher education qualifications. They represent 60% of graduates, but because they don't take science subjects, they often don't have the necessary skills and qualifications to meet today's challenges. That's a key issue, and I think we could do something about that across Europe. It's a European issue, so that's perhaps something that would be quite cheap, to have a collective education policy in these areas. I'll wrap up here before I hand over to our panelists and give us the opportunity to listen to them. We have to think about the defence industry and the defence market, which illustrates all of the benefits we would get from working together and all of the challenges we face. The defence industry market is very fragmented, both in terms of supply and demand. There are 17 different types of tanks around Europe. The USA only has one. That's just an illustration of that fragmentation, and there's a lot of mistrust of European countries with respect to France, which is a big arms producer. France probably has some accountability around that. It's had a bit of an arrogant attitude and hasn't sold arms to other countries and has kept its weapons for itself. So it's not going to be automatic. European countries aren't necessarily going to straight away turn to other European countries. A lot of our weaponry comes from imports, particularly American imports. So there's a real fragmentation. It's a real challenge for us, and I hope that together we will be able to provide a number of answers to these questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emmanuelle. Before we get into the debates and the different talks, I'd like to ask François de GALHAU, Governor of the Banque de France, to tell us his perspective about sovereignty, European sovereignty or European independence. First of all, I want to thank Nicolas BEYTOUT, who is one of the best journalists in Aix, to ask the Governor of the Banque of France to talk not about a monetary issue, but about a linguistic issue. I think we all here agree about European sovereignty, but when you ask French people about it, they don't necessarily all have a positive attitude. I saw a survey last year. There are a third of French people who think it's a positive notion, a small third who think it's negative, and more than a third who think it's neither positive nor negative. Why is that? Because, as Emmanuelle said, there's a bit of ambiguity between sovereignty and European, because sovereignty is often a nationalist context, and in France we often think of sovereignty as a return of a monarchy. We don't want that, but there are other words we could use. You could use power, emancipation. That's what Trump is pushing us towards, and Christine Lagarde and I both like independence. It's a word that central bankers like. When Trump talked about Liberation Day on the 2nd of April, and Christine Lagarde said it's the first day of European independence. I thought that was pretty good. Nicolas, I hope you'll ask me, allow me to have another extra minute. Whatever the words we use, I think the key idea is putting Europe ahead of the game, putting Europe the right way out. This putting Europe in head. Here's a cap. Which I promised to wear. I'm not going to keep it on because it's a bit hot, but you'll see the message on it. Make Europe great again. Thank you very much. You'll have to keep it on for a little bit of time, so while people take photos. If we could have my microphone on throughout the debate, that would be really helpful to enable interaction. Thank you very much, François, Governor of the Banque de France. I'm going to hand the floor now to Nicolas DUFOURCQ, who is CEO of the French Public Investments BPI France. I think you've got a bit of a more tricky perspective on European sovereignty. You've said we have been doubly colonized. By whom? Yes, about a week ago, I wrote an article. On the Monday of the week, J.D. Vance had some very unacceptable words to speak about Europe, and on the Wednesday, the ambassador of China said some things that were unacceptable about Europe, and I was basically saying that people are talking Europe down. I wasn't wanting to be bitter, I was just wanting to be very clear-sighted. In terms of digital technologies, we've been colonized. It's not our fault. We've been colonized by big American corporations because of strategic effects that took place, strategic decisions that were taken in 2005, 2006. We were thinking of building a European cloud back in those days, and it was going to be built by one of the big European corporations, SAP, but SAP didn't do it. Then I think about China. They have 35% of manufacturing industry around the world. They're growing by 1 percentage point a year, and they'll soon get to 50%. And they're behaving like powerful people behave towards the less powerful. They are behaving in a condescending manner. So that was why I said that we're being doubly colonized, a digital colonizer and an industrial colonizer. And I encourage people to read a book by Albert Memmi, Portrait of Settler, Portrait of a Colonizer, and it explains how colonized peoples need to allow themselves to create an insurgency against the colonization. It's a long process because when you start to be colonized, you don't necessarily realize it until one day you wake up and you realize that you've lost sovereignty. When you've lost sovereignty, unfortunately, you have to start turning towards methods which are somewhat Trump-like, rather violent methods. We're going to turn to the question of the European Commission in a moment. I saw an article that was written by a number of business leaders, some of whom are here in Aix, some of the unicorns, as they're referred to in France, protesting against the way Europe is locking down access to artificial intelligence with the AI Act on a European level. One of the bosses said this, made this quote, which I found was very interesting and relevant. Europe is starting to legislate, and then it ends up simplifying things. Europe starts by legislating, then ends up simplifying. How do you see things, Nicolas? Do you generally see things as a first step of legislation and then simplification later? Nicolas, I think one of the failings of our union of 27 countries is that we started to create a form of unity which is very legal. The unit of production is legislative output standards, and it's unlikely to slow down anytime soon. So under the authority of someone who was not very well known as a bureaucrat, Thierry Breton, there were some European acts, the Digital Services Act, DSA, and LSA. It was something that was developed from a legal mindset. France works in a similar way, legislating first, then simplifying. So we've had quite an influence on the European Union and the three-way dialogue between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. It's a deep-lying problem, and that's why we need to turn things around. In general, and I'll be very brief here, those who are complaining are the people who haven't fought enough. In reality, we need to do more lobbying. Is it colonizers who have accepted their fate? No, that's not exactly what I'm saying. We need to realize what time we live in. In Europe, we have a legal and legislative timeline. We need to lobby the Commission and the Parliament. If you think about car production, there are big groups, so we're shareholders. Often only have 2 or 3 lobby employees in Brussels, but they need 15. If you didn't want the DMA or the DSA, you needed another 50 people to lobby the Parliament and the Commission. We need to fight. We just have to fight. Is the Commission receptive? I'll ask the question to the others, but in your view, is it receptive? Is the new Commission? Yes, it is receptive. It is receptive in terms of international trade, what we've gradually managed to do in terms of relations with China. No one could have imagined it. It's because of constant presence in Brussels, a message that is starting to be heard. It's a real hand-to-hand struggle in the corridors of Berlaymont, but when we win it, we do take ground. Stéphane Pellet, I don't know whether we call your company FDJ United or in French, FDJ. In Aix-en-Provence, you might say FDJ United. I don't know quite how it's said in London, but what would European sovereignty mean for you? What does it mean to a company like yours? Yes, it is something that's very meaningful to us because we are called FDJ United because what we want to become is a European champion. I think very deeply that European sovereignty won't be achieved without European champions. We might make some political statements that everyone agrees with, but it will be a bit of bargaining, horse trading, if we don't have European players who will carry these policies forward, carry this independence forward, as François was talking about. Companies that will be able to make choices in terms of digital technologies. All of this requires strength, scale. So European sovereignty without European businesses is not going to be possible. I think the first thing to say to respond to what Nicolas was saying is that I think the position of the European Commission is a lot more positive these days. The relations with European Commission departments and services remains a fairly legal, legislative relationship, and that's difficult for businesses. We need a commission that talks the language of businesses and competitiveness, and it's not completely the case at the moment. People who work in the business world work on to a business time scale. I've known dossiers and subjects that took 3 years to talk about, and we were discussing with legislators and civil servants. We need European champions that will be able to go head-to-head with American champions. So what's the issue? The issue is bureaucracy. It's a bureaucracy. The European Commission has its own KPIs, and its KPIs are not focusing on developing European champions. The second thing I would say, if you'd allow me, and this is something which is connected to other subjects that some of the financial and banking authorities are looking at, is that there won't be a European champion without European shareholders. There's a lot of money saved and invested in Europe, but it's not enough of it is invested in businesses. We're a bit of an exception. We have 17% individual retail shareholders. There's not a lot of companies with such a big retail shareholding. We've also got big institutional shareholding. So more than half of the CAC 40 has most of its shareholding held by American investors. That's increasing. That proportion is increasing. So probably the third thing to say is that we will be able to make European choices with European actors. So choosing slightly more risky cloud solutions might be a choice. 70% of European companies use American cloud solutions, and 70% of their data is in American cloud solutions. It's not because we like that, but it's because there's not a lot of other solutions which offer the same level of security. So in terms of gaming and gambling, where data security is very important, I remember when we were talking about the privatization of your company, which used to be called Française des Jeux, people were saying, you're not thinking really of privatizing, it's putting the tool in the hands of people who are into money laundering. Well, let me just say that isn't what happened. That wasn't necessarily the question I was trying to ask, but we're a company in which transaction security is vital, risk prevention is absolutely essential. Data is crucial because we're an increasingly digital company, so when I have to make a choice about where I place my data, my choice is USA or USA, and that's a problem for me. Is it a different problem? Is it just a moral problem, or is it a real issue of security? It does raise an issue of economic security and security generally. And it's not that the big companies that host our data are not secure, but with the arrival of Donald Trump, I think everyone has become aware that even data services supplier that says your data is secure, you might not be entirely sure of it. Do you have an alternative? No, not yet. Not really. There are some people saying there's a start of an alternative offering, but the thing that's really interesting to say is that we have an association of businesses alongside the French Information Services Security Directorate who said there's maybe not an overall solution, but we might be able to take a little bit more greater level of risk and ask and store some of the data in Europe. It's not just about European sovereignty, it's in our interest. Thank you very much. Jean-Louis GIRODOLLE, you are Managing Director and CEO of LAZARD Investment Banking. You obviously work in the financial services industry and you support European international development. You've led a number of transactions which might not be exactly what we dream of in terms of European sovereignty, in terms of M&A activity. But perhaps that's your role as an investment banker. You said that European sovereignty starts with individual states renouncing a bit of their national sovereignty to build European sovereignty. If you want to talk about the different transactions, we can talk about them, but we might do it outside of this panel discussion. I think, as Nicolas said, we are at a tipping point in terms of our European history. We're talking about sovereignty not in the same way that we talk about national sovereignty, but as François said, we're talking of sovereignty in terms of independence and power. Let's not forget that the European project has been built in order to take power away from nation states who had abused it up till then, and we said we'll dilute it in a big legal construction to avoid the risk of going back to war with one another again. We're currently going through a transition. The way it was built was fundamental, and it's evident in the way that Europe has been put together. Europe is now realizing that it's important to move away from the refusal of power. It's not really a very easy thing to do, but in crises and times of shock, or with the arrival of China, with USA pulling out, we're getting more and more isolated in the world. Our demography is not great. Our proportion of world GDP, we've only got 4 really big technological companies. We've got banks which are a fraction of what the banks in America represents. Europe needs to change. Europe had built its relationship with the world on the basis of contractualization, whereas other countries had built a balance of power. There's a new situation. It's a new situation for European philosophy. So the nation states need to accept their dependency, their interdependency. We need to agree to decide things on a European level. It's becoming obvious. You've given a number of examples. Let's talk about the defense sector, which was mentioned earlier. It's a sensitive issue. It's one of the most important industries for each of the countries in the European Union, but it's also a sector in which the gap is biggest between what we'd like to do and what we actually do day to day. We've done the easiest steps. We've promised some resource. We've developed some initiatives, the European Defence Fund and other funds that are being used, particularly to support Ukraine. But what we need to do, and we're a long way off at the moment, is to define 1 or 2 programs for each major defence function. There'll be large-scale programs with one single European consortium, and all European countries need to commit to buy from this consortium. We're doing the opposite of that. I don't know how many military programs we have, 3 fighter planes, 2 multinational programs for fighter planes. I don't know how many tanks. We've got more F-35s in Europe from the USA than European planes. We've got a program for the Franco-German tanks. So we've got 2 kind of Iron Dome, French-Italian project, and an Israeli-French project. All of that, we We see it in all sorts of areas where we need to build European champions. The French president has been criticised for some of his points of view on this area, but he's right to say that one state can't have all the champions. We need to invest in European champions that are the best place to go forward in those areas, and each state needs to recognise that there are strengths and weaknesses everywhere. So it means accepting the fact of letting go an instrument of power. Yes, letting go of something at the wrong scale. That means that public opinion and government needs to become aware that there is a European interest, and that requires long-term political effort. So what you're saying is all this is happening at a time when the populations are generally turning against Europe. They want to go back to a form of nationalism. We're seeing that in countries where governments were elected on that basis, on that kind of policy, and we can see that in surveys ahead of the elections that are coming up in the next couple of years. How can we move beyond this contradiction? In my view, that will take time. On a European level, we need to put in place some actions that are relevant to European citizens. We need the European Union to get a hold of concrete issues. Defence is perhaps one of them, but it's also a very symbolic issue, and not all Europeans say things in the same way. The need to work together for a defence is perceived differently in Warsaw and Helsinki than it is in Madrid. You'll see that in the surveys. There are other issues. Education is a central issue where we would need to draw inspiration from different countries in order to catch up. And that's the case for our country, France in particular. So there are issues where Europe needs to respond. We need to put in place some cultural programs. We had the Franco-German exchange program at Erasmus. There was a sense of European citizenship, and we need to encourage it through concrete actions. Thank you very much. François Villois de GALHAU, you looked like you weren't entirely sure of what was being said, whether or not you have the cap on your head, about the fact that some European populations turning against Europe, or in any case, somewhat opposed or mistrustful towards Europe. Is that right or wrong? Let me just illustrate it with one success, the euro. But I just want to bring a little bit of cultural insight from Paul Cézanne, someone who, if we're not careful, we accept tranquil mediocrity. We need to avoid accepting tranquil mediocrity. So why do I talk about the euro? Enrico LETTA here wrote an incredible report, and then Mario Draghi has written a brilliant report recently. And what they're talking about is transposing what we did in terms of monetary sovereignty 25 years ago towards economic and financial sovereignty. On the basis of monetary sovereignty, the euro, I wanted to give you three prudent reasons for help. The first one, and that's why Nicolas, my body language wasn't necessarily in agreement with you. The euro is a major political success. The euro started in France with 51% support. That was the referendum in 1992. In the Euro survey, the support for the euro has never been as high. 79% of French people and 83% of Europeans support it. So we are living in a time of alleged Euroscepticism and populism. When Europe shows that it can work hard towards a common objective, it can be popular. The second lesson I would talk about, and here about Enrico's superior logic. How can we face up to the financial and economic power of America? One of the key thing was having a mobilizing date. The 1st of January 1990 was a key date. We focused everything. And with the single market, Jacques Delors focused on the 1st of January 1993. Everyone focused on the same deadline, the same dates. deep state and business, everyone was working towards the same thing. I think we need a date, 1st of January 2028, for our economic and financial response to Trump and the Chinese. And then the euro was a really embodied thing. The notes in our pockets were euros, so we need to mobilize European savings investments in order to make concrete conquests. So there are three areas I'd mention: defense, artificial intelligence, and decarbonized energy. I think we can make some concrete promises that will change people's daily lives. One third lesson, if you allow me, Nicolas, with a bit of historical perspective. Sovereignty is never a static comfort. It needs to be a dynamic conquest. In terms of monetary sovereignty, we scored points. Jean-Louis, we shared sovereignty in order to enhance our sovereignty, but we have today a risk and an opportunity. The risk is technological. It's what we refer to as stable coins. There are private currencies issued by non-state, non-public actors in dollars, and it's important that we ensure our European sovereignty with a digital currency. I'm going to finish on a note of hope. With everything that's going on around the American administration, there is an expectation to make a monetary and a financial European union. It will have to happen progressively and gradually with more European assistance to build the defence industry. There'll be some pooling of national debt. There's no obvious solution, but with Christine Lagarde and a certain number of other European actors, I think that we need to talk about the international role of the euro and everything we need to do to strengthen our European financial market will contribute to the external appeal of Europe, because more Europe will be integrated financially, we'll get equity from the outside.
Thank you very much. So, is the European Commission up to the task? Well, on the monetary Europe, it's happening more in Frankfurt than in Brussels, actually. So what does that mean? That means that you have all free... No, I'm very happy to say good things about the Commission. The Commission is evolving. I think we need to accelerate a bit on the mobilizing date. Maybe the portfolios are a bit all over, but I can guarantee you that in Frankfurt there's 26 people around the table, and I am an old-fashioned type of governor. I probably attended 100 boards of governors, and I go once a month, and I've never felt such a will, such a European will, than since last January. Board after board meeting after board meeting. Before we give the floor to Enrico LETTA, I would like to go back on the speed factor. I think it's absolutely fundamental. In European companies, there's an expectation, huge expectations, and Stéphane explained it, of change, that to go faster and to faster adaptation. We want the European Commission, to be more proactive and react more quickly to the world as it is versus the world as we would like it to be. Unfortunately, this is not the world we live in. And when I see this morning that the European Ombudsman is attacking the President of the European Commission by going too fast and not respecting such and such procedure, I think this is crazy. Stéphane, PALLEZ, I wanted just to add something. First of all, when we remember the word sovereignty for companies, historically, companies used to be afraid that it would be a way to stop them from doing what they want. And what I see is that today companies are asking to go down that route. So this is quite new. Whenever we look at the boss of the MEDEF who signs the tribune for the economic sovereignty by calling everyone to take decisions together, it's very new. The other thing is for companies, to get back to what François was saying on citizens, French citizens and European citizens, we all agree, but the European citizens are not all in agreement yet. And I believe that companies have a very important role to play there. So the Commission has, of course, its role to play. Companies have their role to play because they are vectors of trust and transformation. Because today, in the institutions that the citizens trust, The political authorities are very low in the ratings, and the companies are fairly well rated since COVID, because they have a capacity. They have shown their capacity to transform themselves in middle-term projects with communities of employees, and not to worry only about profit every day, because they think that they have more benefits by not doing so. So I think one French person out of 10 believes that we can stop exchanging with the rest of the world. So we're not there yet, and unfortunately, citizens are voting, or fortunately, they're voting, so they're going to have to be convinced as well. Enrico LETTA, you are the president of the Institute Jacques Delors. You were with the Italian government. You held several ministerial positions in Italy. You were nearly the boss of Sciences Po, and I wish that you were. That's just a side note. François VILLEROY de GALHAU has advertised the relationship to the state, which is with the Draghi report, the two texts of law that mark the progression of Europe. So maybe in a few words, can you summarize what is this LETTA report? I'm not sure everybody, this report, LETTA. It means that the European Union, after those last few years, they have decided that the domestic market on the one hand and the competitiveness on the other becomes the heart of the debate. So the report that I made on the domestic the market and the Draghi report on competitiveness, both reports are linked to each other. Why? Because if the domestic market is not integrated, there's no competitiveness, of course. We're too small, each of us, if we have to face China, India, the US, etc. So the key question today is, if we talk about domestic market, and this is the heart of my report, but the daily life is telling us that domestic market is not integrated. It's not integrated in the two fundamental fields for competitiveness, which is services and capital. In the financial area, we're a colony of the United States. Let's put it as it is. And let's harness our need for sovereignty. Each of us has made some purchases today. We've bought coffee. Tonight we're going to take a ticket at the opera. We're going to buy a ticket and we're going to pay, and we're going to pay digitally. And each of us is going to buy a European good between sellers and European buyers and sellers on the European ground with credit cards that are only American credit cards, because we don't have a European credit card for the simple reason that we're fragmented in 27 countries. That we only have American credit cards. So that means that every payment we're making here in X, all the data are going somewhere else, and there's commission, and the commission fees as well are going somewhere else. And this is a first example of the fragmentation. Fragmentation is just an abstract concept of something that is very concrete and it's a real power. Nicolas, if you ask me what is sovereignty, for me, European sovereignty for me is a sentence that I would put in the entrance of the parliament in Brussels. It's one of the titles of Elon Musk that he raised in a tweet that Elon Musk raised. He posted and raised it right away. He was talking to Ukrainians, but to us too. And he was telling us, if I disconnect you, you collapse in 1 minute. He suppressed it right away. So, but if I disconnect you, that means in 1 minute you disappear. So why would I put it on the frame of the door of the parliament? Because we're not sovereign, we're not independent from a technological standpoint. There's the gentleman who's not even a government, who's on the other side of the world, and who, if he clicks us off, if he pushes on a button, we're all blacked out. So our sovereignty and our autonomy depends on that. I'm going to tell you a story. I was in Copenhagen a few weeks ago. I was presenting actually this report, François, and I'm presenting the report to the Danish Parliament. You remember, certainly, when I was a student, Denmark was the opt-out. You remember that they were a bit anti-European. Then there was Brexit, and the Greenland that also played a big role. But the Danes today are really pro-European. I'm presenting the report in Denmark, of course, in English. The head of the conservative parties, and he says, "I'm going to speak French." So the room remains quiet, and he looks at the sky and he says, "Mr. General de Gaulle, please forgive us. You were the one who was right. The strategic autonomy in Europe is fundamental." I thought that episode much more telling than many others. But as you know, Nicolas, I can tell an episode from my personal life as well. To illustrate this, what we need to do as progress, in terms of progress, tell us about how you moved in Spain. Well, I moved in Spain, but I could have moved to Italy. I could have moved to Bratislava. I am renting an apartment, a small apartment. I like to clarify. So I'm looking. So I want to try to change, to my electricity bill to make sure that it's on my name. So I'm in a call with a call center. It was a human being, thank God, and not AI. And we get to the end of it, and at the very end, he says, "There's a final detail. Give me your bank account number and your telephone number, and then we sign the contract, and it's your own contract for electricity." So I give them my credit card, my banking info, and my phone number. And the gentleman tells me, "Senor, what is this IT at the beginning of your bank account? And I need an ES. And what is this plus 39? I need 34, plus 34." And I have to confess that I was about to tell you, I'm sending you my report on the single European market. But this is really a real story, and that makes you wonder that I legally have the right to have electricity installed in Spain with an Italian bank account, an Italian phone number. That would be really a single market. But then I open a third bank account after the French one and the Italian one, and I have my third phone after the French and the Italian one, which is a Spanish phone. So of course it's not an issue, it's not my problem, but it's a general problem. We're not a domestic single market, because we don't have the dimension of this market. So in two words, either we manage to build this domestic market, and we can build the union of the savings. And I need to thank François, because the brand was designed with him on the desk of the governor of the Bank of France. But in a few words, Europe needs to be united. And if I take my hat as well, if I'm being asked if you would choose between the US and China, well, you have to choose Europe. That's the correct answer. Europe has to be built. We have two major assets, the domestic market, the euro. Those are the two assets that can make our sovereignty important. And also, we have a fundamental role to play, because we are the place of the rule of law. So being competitive is going to also benefit to those that we love, common law and the great liberal values. François VILLEROY de GALHAU, we need a date, to set a date. I completely agree with François. I even said July 1st, 2027. Why? You said 2028. Well, I'm happy with 2027. I vote for the LETTA motion. There's a reason why. It's a political reason, because the 1st of July 2027 is the beginning of the presidency, the Greek presidency of the European Union. And I believe that with everything that happened 13 years ago, with this horrible behavior that Europe had towards Greece, that it was only thanks to Italy and France and a few of the European countries that Greece managed to be held within the European Union. It was a major choice. Today, Greece can play an important role, and let's imagine what would be this integration of financial markets that would start under the Greek presidency of the European Union. I think it would be sending a very strong message. Thank you, François. And then a word. Yeah, I'm very happy with your date, but it should be a date that everybody knows, and it should be during the Trump years, because, of course, Trump is extremely controversial for global economy, and it's a wake-up call for us. I would like to show another testimony is what's happening in the ministerial meeting since March of last year, because we're caught between the American power and the very dynamic Asia. So for a few months, people are coming to see us, and they're telling me, well, everybody's expecting Europe to show up. And then they add a second sentence, but don't wait too long. So, Nicolas, in all the companies that you partner with and that you have shareholders of, do you feel that there's more expectations from Europe? Yes, I would say it's philosophically strong, a bit skeptical, but on the capital markets front, of course, we need to unite this market, but we should not get carried away by the promise we made to Europeans, because there's a bit of a idealistic denial on what Brussels was capable to accomplish. We promised a lot after '92, after the creation of the euro. Did it really bring so much growth to Europe? The people of Bordeaux, Cavaillon, Aix-en-Provence says no to that question. So what would make the unification of the capital market be a success is when we have a super weight of European finance that will compete with the Blackstones of this world. And there are very few of them. We have a huge problem with financial entrepreneurship in Europe. We have major institutions that are historical, that have a strong legacy, sometimes even if they're bureaucratic. We have major deposit banks, but the entrepreneurs capable of creating their own investment company to reinvest in Europe with profit, with patriotism, like the Americans do, we don't have those. We don't have many of those. And if I can list those who were able to do that by creating their company from scratch, I could count less than 10 for the whole continent. So I'm happy to have the union of capital market, but if it's to create a huge green carpet that will be challenged by Vanguard to invest in American shares, stocks, will be a failure. Thank you, Jean-Louis. GIRODOLLE, I think this is quite a challenge that is addressed to you. It is a challenge to all the actors, of course. We in Europe, we're lucky to have major companies in many sectors. They're often marginalized, and sometimes they are, proportionally speaking, world leaders. So we're not starting from scratch. There's an expectation, of course, from these companies for the European Commission to move fast. We need to put in place the right conditions so these European champions keep building up their strengths. And that leads to the question, where are we going to adapt the rules of antitrust? Yeah, there's a big thing that we're not saying is the problem of the control of foreign investment that stiffened up in the last few months. There are two regulatory topics. There's one that you merge and you do M&A. It's the control of foreign investments if the investor is foreign. And then there's the rules of concentration and the antitrust law. In any event, there's a challenge in Europe. On the control of foreign investors, we see that we're regressing actually at the moment, because for many years now, and in particular with COVID, the states have enlarged the scope of the control of foreign investments for reasons that are more and more diverse. In the treaties, it was first boiled down to security. Then we extended the word security with a number of adjectives, each minister adding their own. So we have food security, we have digital security, technological security. The President of the Republic was even mentioning the protein security, mentioning the Mercosur. So we're really going backwards. And each country has dropped the threshold. So we're really looking at a domestic market that works less and less well. And on the other hand, we have the creation of European champions that is being hindered by a competition law that is inspired towards protecting consumers to hope that the prices would drop with a really crazy competition. So that means that there's many actors and they're not there's not numerous enough to have a size that matters internationally. There are three, Enrico, LETTA, three major financial fusions in mergers in Europe that are going through a difficult process. Can you describe the political context of these three mergers? I think it's very interesting because it's really a matter of having a gap between what you say and what you do. We all say let's scale up, let's consolidate, let's be bigger. Otherwise, the Americans and the Chinese will eat us. There are three major banking concentrations that make sense. It's one in Spain, there's one in Italy, and there's one between Spain and Germany. The three governments is on left-wing government, right-wing government, and the middle centrist government. So the three governments that I mentioned, they're all against. Not because they're not backing the general idea, but because when you go in the domestic field, at the end of the day, the domestic reasons are the ones that matter the most. But the key question here is can we start by being concrete? If we remain fragmented, I'll give you the example of credit cards, savings. If we remain fragmented, 3 billion euros per year of our savings are going straight to the US and become stock that reinforces American companies that come back in Europe to buy our company with our own money. It's completely paradoxical. So the lack of scale is a fundamental problem. I would like to say in 10 seconds something. I am not saying that we should be all giants, the American style, but we should move from national champions to being a European champion. And we should have the most innovative tools and be able to work with these champions. If we don't do that, if we don't understand that 35 years ago, Italy was as big and cost less, Lorenzo can confirm that, Italy was as big 30 years ago than China and India put together. You're smiling, but it's the truth. Today, China and India together represent 20 times Italy, the weight of Italy. So this is the way the world looks, and we need to scale up with our tools. Just a word, François. I hope to say a positive word. If we look at the financial Europe that we have today, we have more savings in Europe than in the US. We have all credit and banks that we need. There's a big offer. What we're really lacking is equity and VC, venture capital. That we have a big deficit versus the US. How do we bridge this gap? I'm going to say a lot of good things about what BPI France did. If you look at all the startup system, we managed to do something great. But if we scale up, we can't do it because we're limited by our national borders. I think it's not so much the competition law, it's the national borders. Should we be imagining a European-style BPI? Yes, I think that's what it should be. Emmanuelle AURIOL, in 1 second, I'm going to speak as an economist from the Cercle d'Economistes. I don't want to throw the competition law away. I think it still protects us in Europe. So I think the problem is more fragmentation by country than a competition law that protects European consumers. Thank you. We usually thank the panel. This is a tradition. We've had a great panel. I would like to say that the show that you're offering to us with all these fans show us that you made a great effort to sit in that heat and having the fans to make you breathe. Thank you very much.